Hello, everyone. Welcome to Whaling with Ishmael. This is meant to be a podcast channel, and the first thing that I have intended is for anyone who is interested in Herman Melville. I fully intend, although I realize it might take quite a while, to read the story of Moby Dick. I don't know. It's one of the most. I haven't read a super large number of books, but it's been one of the most influential on me. I have some other ideas for things that the channel could do that I'm pretty excited about, and I have some friends that I'm interested in talking to about a lot of this stuff. And but yeah, hope you guys enjoy. If you guys have really any interesting facts about Herman Melville, or really about any way literature has moved you in general, or mythology, I would encourage you to comment. Anyways, without further ado, I have recorded an about the author, which was from the Reader's Digest, and I'll attach that onto the end of this audio file. Enjoy. Moby Dick, Herman Melville, about the author. On September 28, 1891, an old man died quietly at 104 East 26th Street in New York City. He had been living there for 28 years, earning his living as a customs inspector. His death received 3 lines of notice in one newspaper. His name was Herman Melville, and today he is regarded as a literary genius. His principal work, Moby Dick, was published in 1851, but it was so neglected that for the rest of his life Melville considered himself a failure. When the novel was reissued in 1921, 30 years after its author's death, it began to garner popular interest and critical acclaim. Summing up the views of many of his peers, one critic declared, "It is the most impressive single work in American literature." How can anyone account for this literary death and resurrection? There are 2 answers. In one sense, Melville's masterpiece was 70 years ahead of its time. In another, it was 340 years out of date. Melville was born in New York City on August 1, 1819, the son of a prosperous merchant. He wanted to free himself of respectable conventions and live a life of his own. When his father lost the family wealth, Herman was forced to leave school. He drifted for several years, working in his brother's hat store and on his uncle's farm before leaving the family nest to become a bank clerk. At the age of 17, he turned up on the New York waterfront and signed on board a ship bound for Liverpool. He had good health, strong muscles, and a willing mind, but he detested the filth and vulgarity of life in the forecastle. When he returned from his disappointing adventure, Herman taught school, but he didn't like that profession either. After 3 years of indecision, he made up his mind to become a sailor. Throwing a razor and an extra shirt and pair of pants into a carpet bag, he tramped over to New Bedford, Massachusetts, and booked himself on a whaling ship bound for the South Pacific. The vessel, he soon discovered, had living conditions that were infinitely worse than those on the trip to Liverpool. The captain was brutal, the horse meat was fly-blown, the biscuits were softened only by wormholes. The sailors were unsociable roughnecks, with one exception, a boy named Tobias Green. He and Herman became fast friends, and when their ship docked for repairs at an island in the Marquesas, they agreed to desert after first shoving a handful of biscuits and some tobacco into their shirts. After 5 days, they came upon a beautiful mountain valley that they had been warned about, for it was inhabited by a notorious tribe of cannibals called the Typees. But much to their surprise, the cannibals welcomed them and treated them as honored guests. Tobias was soon shanghaied by another whaler, so Herman lived alone with the cannibals in a state of indulgent captivity. They gave him shelter and a servant, the best of their food, and the prettiest of their daughters as playmates. Herman was a handsome, magnetic youth, and he soon fell in love with a lithe young girl named Flyaway, with whom he went swimming and canoeing and wandering in the woods. The romance between a gifted young American and a girl cannibal on an unexplored island in the South Pacific might have been one of the most engaging tales in our literature if it had been written about frankly. But the nearest Melville came to describing what happened was to say in his book Typee, "If the reader has not observed ere this that I was the declared admirer of Miss Fayaway, he is little conversant with affairs of the heart, and I shall not trouble myself to enlighten him any further." Among those savages, Herman learned that primitive people, left to their own way, may be more happy and good-humored than those who have been afflicted, so to speak, with civilization. "One peculiarity that fixed my admiration," he wrote, "was the perpetual hilarity reigning through the whole vale. There seemed to be no cares, griefs, troubles, or vexations. Blue devils, hypochondria, and doleful dumps went and hid themselves among the nook and crannies of the rocks." Herman's observations profoundly shaped his view of human nature, for they kindled a revolt against the decorous piety of New England, and lifted him out of the mainstream of Victorian culture. "I am inclined to think," he remarked, "that so far as relative wickedness is concerned, 4 or 5 Marquesan Islanders sent to the United States as missionaries might be quite as useful as an equal number of Americans dispatched to the islands in a similar capacity." Herman did not lose sight of the fact, however, that his dream life might at any moment turn into a nightmare. One day, while his hosts were preparing for a feast, he peeked under the lid of a big tub and discovered the pickled bones of a human being. For the first time, since he had arrived several weeks earlier, Herman felt homesick. Hearing that an American sailor was a captive among the cannibals, the captain of a passing whaler sent a boatload of peaceful natives with a musket, gunpowder, and a cotton cloth to buy him back. A large troop of the Typees, Fayaway among them, came down to the harbor for the trade, but the Typees considered the exchange unfair and refused to give up their precious guest. In the midst of the negotiations, Herman jumped into the waiting boat and pushed off, throwing a roll of cloth to Fayaway as he fled. The Typees rushed after him. Their chief tried to grab an oar, and would have tipped the boat over if Herman had not seized the boat-hook and plunged it into the man's body. He was spared the sight of the cannibal chief sinking in the water, and of Fayaway standing on the beach clutching the cloth, for after dealing that death blow, Herman collapsed in a dead faint. Herman was 22 when he left the Marquesas, and 3 more years of vagabond exploits intervened before he came home. When he finally returned, he was full to the bursting point with exciting stories. To put some money in his pocket, he told his stories in writing. Typee and Omoo, his first 2 books, enjoyed instant success. Producing 3 more volumes in the next 4 years, Melville earned enough money to get married and enough fame to convince him that he was now a professional writer. Neither the money nor the fame, though, satisfied his restless ambition. He yearned to write something more enduring than South Sea travelogues. "Until I was 25, I had no development at all," he once wrote. "From my 25th year I date my life." Most observers would think just the opposite. Up to his 25th year, he lived life to the fullest. In that year, he began to think profoundly about life. He began to read voraciously, and he found himself more at home in English literature than on the sea. He read Shakespeare and other Elizabethan dramatists, and was carried away by their stormy eloquence and their crude, violent gusto. When it came to write his own great drama, Moby Dick, Melville put into the mouths of his characters, as Shakespeare had done, language that is more intensely intellectual and poetic than they ever would have spoken in real life. This seemed to his contemporaries clumsy and amateurish. He was an old-fashioned in his style, apparently, as he was avant-garde in his opinions. No one knows just when Melville conceived his masterwork, the epic tale of an ocean-born warfare between man and Leviathan. Although nearly 2 years of the life portrayed in his adventurous books were spent on whaling vessels. The terrible enterprise of killing whales is never described in them. But as an inspiration for tragic drama, whale hunting, as it was practiced in the 19th century, has hardly an equal in size and grandeur. And Melville knew all there was to know about the subject. There was a legend among sailors of a fierce white whale, known to some as Moby Dick. Melville invented for his tragedy Captain Ahab, seething with rage against a white whale, and roaming the seas with a fixed manic purpose to destroy him. The leisure Melville needed to achieve his vision was supplied by his wife's father, who advanced him the money to buy a small farm near Pittsfield, Massachusetts. In the autumn of 1850, when the harvest was in, he dropped everything and sat down to write his immortal book. He finished it in 1 year, and it was published in 1851. But 1 year later it sank out of sight. The average number of copies sold annually over the next few first decades was 123, and the figure dwindled to 22 per year over the following 25 years. In spite of Moby Dick's commercial failure, Melville did not stop writing. Even while supporting his family in a clerical job, he managed to put away one story, Billy Budd, that, discovered after his death, became a classic. But the great Shakespearean command of rhythms and images was gone. Moby Dick had been a burst of genius, and without recognition, he simply could not repeat such a virtuoso performance. 70 years later, and 30 years after Melville's death, a noted English critic announced that he had been induced to read this forgotten book, and that, having done so, I hereby declare that since letters began, there never was such a book, and that the mind of man is not constructed so as to produce such another. I put its author with Rabelais, Swift, Shakespeare. Within a decade of that appraisal, the forgotten customs inspector was recognized as one of the great writers of all time.